Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, Sharon. How are you?
Good. This thing is so quiet. I didn't even know it started. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to say hello to people that are watching and thank them for joining Flywire's newest episode of Smart Talks. Our new LinkedIn Live series, we're highlighting the latest trends in campuses worldwide. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sharon Butler. I am the EVP of Global Education for Flywire. And I'm pleased to introduce you today to Rob Reddy. Rob is the Assistant VP of Enrollment Management and Dean of Student Financial Services from Northeastern. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, Sharon. I want to just thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank everybody who's out in the audience, and just so thrilled to be here to talk about, some things I'm really passionate about, some things I love in my work environment, and just excited to be here.
I have to say, and all the times I've spent with you, I get excited to hear about your ideas and what you're doing, and how you're solving a lot of challenges. So today we're going to discuss the changing landscape of higher education. We'll highlight some topics related to non-traditional programs and populations, as well as ways to address education affordability through long-term payment plans. And I know this is sort of your expertise, and it's really fun to hear the things that you're doing. So I'd love it if you could share with us a bit about Northeastern student population and the types of programs you're offering there for your non-traditional populations.
Sure. I mean, Northeastern is really a fairly large, incredibly decentralized institution. We have 12 campuses, not just in the United States, but we have several campuses abroad. We have about 40,000 students. Northeastern's sort of home base is Boston, but we're really coast to coast. And as I try to remind my staff when we're scheduling meetings, we go across 7 or 8 time zones. We have traditional undergrad sort of day students. That's about 13,000 students in our population. And they're what most people are used to in higher education. But then we have about 25,000 learners across our system in our other programs. And by that, and this is probably the group that's the most non-traditional, we certainly have bachelor completion students. We have a lot of master's level students. We have PhD students. We are a R1 research institution. But then we also offer certificate programs, credentialing programs. Northeastern is heavily getting into the B2B market. So we're working directly with employers, government agencies to provide custom type programs to their constituents. Northeastern certainly offers a lot of programmatic things that might not fall under the traditional Title IV eligibility, student borrowing. And so that really has driven Northeastern to think sort of in 2 segments on affordability. Certainly affordability for undergraduates. We cost about $75,000 a year. That's an incredibly high price tag. And how do we think about affordability across the spectrum of capacity to pay? Because we have students that are quite affluent. We have a lot of students in the middle, and we certainly have initiatives with underrepresented students and students from lower SES segments. But then we're starting to think really creatively about the graduate market. Graduate education is becoming incredibly expensive. Some programs at Northeastern cost well in excess of $100,000. And then, as I said, we have many programs where either the program is not Title IV eligible. For some of our certificate programs, we've chosen not to make them Title IV eligible. Or again, as I said earlier, we're doing B2B type employer government agency to Northeastern programs where maybe we want to work more directly with the employer or the agency in terms of affordability rather than directly with the student. So it's a wide swath of student types, everything from as traditional as you can be to as non-traditional as you can be.
Mm-hmm. It's just fascinating, all the various programs and things, these sort of foundational things that you're figuring out for non-traditional students. I know that the people that are watching or listening, they're starting to think a lot about this. There's been a lot of pressure on the education industry, and it just continues to build. So for anybody sitting out there trying to figure out um, how to approach developing these type of programs, do you have any advice for them?
Sure. I mean, like most institutions, Northeastern has become more and more data driven. And I think the first step is to take a step back and just think about, who are your populations? How are they paying for their programs? What does the data look like? Do you have heavy borrowing going on? Do you have a lot of students in payment plans? How much institutional resources? Every institution is different. It can commit more or less to those sorts of resources. And really, I think when I got to Northeastern, that's the first thing we thought about. What resources are at hand, and how do our learners pay for their educational experiences? I think the next thing that I would suggest folks do is really think comprehensively. This is, I think, a change for most folks in higher education, and certainly for our families and our students. We typically have thought about, how do I afford this program on almost a semester by semester basis? And the change we've brought to the table is to think programmatically, holistically about the cost to degree, cost to credential, and try to develop the mechanisms that address those expenses, whether they're expenses that are going to come from the university to provide to students, whether those are expenses that students are going to have to cover themselves, or are those expenses that we should think about what partners, and by partners I mean the federal, the state government, employers, other agencies, holistically. So for example, we might talk with an undergraduate family about the cost of a Northeastern education being somewhere in the neighborhood of $350,000. And how will we plan across those 4 to 5 years? Northeastern is a co-op institution, so it does take a little bit longer time to degree because of the co-op requirement. So we think, sort of in that 5-year window. And what are all the different things that we can bring to the table, whether it's the university, whether, again, it's the family unit, whether it's outside sources, to help tackle that $300,000 figure. And I think that, we do this at the graduate level now. And I think the biggest thing we've begun to think about is, I've often say investing in education is probably the most expensive thing anybody's going to do in their lives, except maybe buy a home. Right. But quite honestly, at $350,000 for an undergraduate degree, that's a pretty darn nice home. It
is.
In retrospect. But, how do we talk to families about, you can utilize this resource and that resource and something else over here? And I talk about the smorgasbord approach, a little bit of everything to get you to the end goal of paying for that education. And as you mentioned earlier, one of our newest and biggest initiatives is thinking about payment plans in that holistic framework, not just semester by semester, and actually not even just by time to degree, but even from time of acceptance and matriculation, which may be, particularly for some students, 6-8 months before they start their program, to even some time after program, maybe 3 to 6 months post program, and getting families and students in the cadence and cycle of paying during in-school periods, but also paying during out-of-school periods. And so that I would suggest that institutions think as creatively as they can, as holistically as they can, and don't be afraid to test something out. We
Right.
tested out our long-term payment plan on a relatively small population to begin. We weren't about to launch it to 40,000 learners. We learned from that. We are definitely making adjustments, but we also found some really key successes.
Yeah, I feel like, they always say to change is to grow, and to test some things out is usually the best way. I really like how foundationally starting with the data. That makes a lot of sense, because there's trends and habits and things that are happening on campus that if you just kind of look at the data, it gives you a good foundation to start with.
Right.
That seems like a really good approach. Let me ask you this too. Have you noticed, do you feel like that there has been more of a hit financially as a result of the pandemic? Is a lot of this stuff in response to trying to manage through that, or is this something just you've been looking at for a long period of time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we haven't used the pandemic as the catalyst for this discussion. At NU, what we've stepped back to say is, let's plan today for when an undergraduate degree costs $100,000 a year, because we can look in the trends and we know that, based on where we're at and what our cost structure is, that's going to happen in the next decade.
Right.
We look at our graduate programs, and as I mentioned, some are over $100,000 for the program already, and many will be there in the next decade. And, we try to think in those sort of terms. Let's not solve the problem of today. Let's address the problem of today with a perspective of 5 and 10 years. And I think that's helped us drive to coming up with more innovation. Because if we just look at this problem from a 1-year standpoint, it's really not where we're going to be as institutions 5 and 10 years from now. And so the pandemic has been a blip. We certainly have utilized some of the resources that have come to us through the federal government, the CARES and HERF Act. We did some philanthropy and fundraising to help students, but those aren't the long-term solutions. We hope to God the pandemic is not a long-term issue. And we need to think about the issue, which is the astronomical cost of higher education today and where it's going to be in 5 and 10 years. Because when it crests 100,000 at the undergraduate level, for example, who is going to really be a full pay family? Everybody is going to be needy.
Exactly. I think it's really, smart and transparent to start looking that way, just to solve for the future. I guess once again, thinking about people that are listening in, or, looking for some insights, where do you start these broader discussions on, how do you coordinate family financial planning with the institution?
Yeah, are we talking about from the learner perspective or from the institutional perspective? Because I'd have two different answers.
Well, I feel like if we think probably institutional, from the institutional perspective.
I think that conversation has to start at the senior level to bring an awareness to the fact of kind of what does it cost, what resources are out there for students to use. What does need analysis look like, and how unrealistic is need analysis? Because I'll share a personal opinion. I think it's broken. And to see what can the university commit. And by that commitment, we don't always want it to be give more grant. It was a commitment for NU to think about a long-term payment plan that extended beyond time to degree, because it's a cash flow issue. And so, the question to the CFO was, would you rather put more grant dollars on the table, or would you rather alter how we expect cash to flow into the institution as an affordability measure for our families? And I think it has to start there. That's the conversation after the data. And that's how we went after it.
So so we've, talked about, sort of how you look at things and some strategies. And, one of the things that you went for or testing is long-term payment plans. I know you have more ideas around that, but could you share any of the results that you're seeing with some of your testing?
Sure. I will say also, one of the other things we realized going into all this affordability conversation was the traditional model doesn't work any longer. The traditional model is you have a financial aid unit. Some people apply, some people don't. It's a cumbersome process, and an award is provided. And then a learner or a family sits there, whether they're undergrad or graduate, and at some point in time, somebody sends them that bill. And there's nothing in between. So we started with the idea that we need to fill the in between. It's become too burdensome, too complex for either a graduate student or an undergrad and their parents to figure out how to pull together all these potential resources. And we created a financial counseling team. They don't process FAFSAs and they don't certify loans. They don't issue bills and they don't receipt payments. But they sit in between those two units as a resource for a family to come in and say, how do I pay for this? And again, the conversation is being moved from let's get through this semester to let's get through this program. So we have that team and some of the outcomes, and I'll talk mostly about the long-term payment plan.
Okay.
We decided to pilot that. It's a year-round payment plan. We chose our undergraduate population to work with to begin, and even a subset. We had just under 4,000 eligible families for this, and we got about a 10% take rate. We thought that was amazing. We've gotten them into a cadence. They pay every month, whether a student is enrolled or not enrolled. We do a lot of counseling with the families if they change their meal plan or if the student decides to go to summer school. How do we proactively discuss that with the family about what they're having to pay? We oftentimes are talking to them about what other resources are out there. And the feedback that we have gotten is that this significantly helps families budget their monthly expenses. I had one mother say to us, we looked at that first bill and we didn't know how we were going to come up with $15,000. But we can pay $1,250 a month for a year to cover those expenses.
Right.
That feedback was almost universal. As I said, some more of the hard data. We have about 400 families on the program. The average plan is just under $30,000. People are making about $2,500 a month payments. We are into our fourth month of payments. Our missed payment rate or default rate on the plans has been in the single digits. Oftentimes that's more related to, I had a credit card or my debit card shut off for some reason, and I just didn't update the system. I think we've all encountered that. But I think the biggest statistic that I am most proud of for students not offered this opportunity who were eligible to borrow a student loan, the take rate was about 50%. The same category of student in this program, the take rate was 36%. We are, like many institutions, highly focused on driving down student borrowing. But in all candor, we can't do it all through institutional grant. And offering a creative program like this appears at first blush to have driven down our borrowing rates. And we have heard the same thing from our families. The other incredibly insightful comment we got came from families who had 529 plans. We never expected this. They said a payment plan like this helps us manage the expense of the 529, allows us to stretch it out, and it financially helps us plan not just for this child, but for other children we may have. And we got about 15% of our population telling us that. So few of the details.
Well, there's nothing better than getting that feedback. You know, it'll be fun to watch how things grow. I know you have some other ideas too, with even longer term plans. It's you know, I love being able to hear your ideas and share them with others. And we really do appreciate your insights. And we wish your students the best and enjoyed this very, very much. For anybody that's interested in hearing more, this conversation will be on our website. You can visit flywire.com. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rob.
Thank
Happy
you,
holidays.
everyone. Happy holidays.